Hello YouTube, this is Luke again from Paladins coming at you with another deck profile. This time, this is my newly built Zorga Masks deck profile. This is a deck that I never expected to actually fall in love with, but when it came to the mask units, Zorga was very much a quick fire decision on my part because of how well the deck runs, how many different variants of the deck you can run, and how much pressure the deck can actually deliver to your opponent early game. So we'll start off with the ride line. The ride line is the most basic, but there are some changes you can do, some different variations you can run I have found, but it mainly comes in the form of the grade 3. So the grade 0, obviously any starter when it comes to Stokeia. The grade 1, you want to run Rancor Chain, simply because of the extra draw power early game, and with the amount of orders you run in this deck, you want to capitalize on getting those extra cards into hand. Black Tier Husk Dragon. Again, normal one for capitalizing on your orders. When you ride, you add an order back to hand, so whatever order you discarded. Potentially, if you can discard a grade 1 or a grade 2 when you draw 2 off of Rancor Chain, then you are just setting yourself up for a quick order, and if you can get the right orders, you can potentially get Twin Drive early game, or you can just get more units to set yourself up for hard riding or persona riding into a mask, and then you just get better combos. I run the original set 1 Zorga. I've seen decks and I've tested decks which run the Grave Zorga from the Festival Collection. Both are good choices. I just prefer the original Zorga simply because of the free Alchemy magic, and if you need to call something from drop zone with a counterblast, you bring something back depending on what you drop, or if you guard with anything early game. Grave Zorga is nice because the 5k to the front row when you Alchemy magic, but I feel it's a little bit too expensive having to Soul Blast and discard a card simply to be able to Alchemy magic, and early game I feel you need cards in hand to be able to make this deck capitalize on what you can do. So, we'll start with the grade 3s first, as always. So the grade 3s, as you would expect, I'm running 4 copies of Teasing Spiritualist Zorga Masque. Now, Zorga Masque is a very interesting unit. He's not overly aggressive, but then again, this deck never has been. The Vanguard Zorga itself has never been an aggressive card. It's the rear guards and the power the rear guards get which make this deck seem very naughty. So obviously with every single mask unit there is, you can't ride this card without riding on the prior unit with the main unit's name in its name. So in this case, it's a unit with Zorga, so you can use the original Zorga to ride the mask, or you can use the Grave equals Zorga. Again, it's personal preference, whichever one you would like to run. When you Alchemy Magic, again, like the normal Zorga, it's just a free Alchemy Magic cost. So when you play an order, you bind an order from drop zone, and you perform Alchemy Magic. You combine the cost, combine the effects, and you're golden. The only difference is when you have Zorga Masks on the Vanguard, when you Alchemy Magic, your front row gets 10,000 power. And you can use the third skill to remove a card with Zorga from your soul hand or drop if you run the more than one copy. I do not, but then again, I can still capitalize on getting kings back from drop regardless. But when you use the remove Zorga, you can call a card back from drop zone, or you can add an order card back from your drop zone into your hand, so you're capitalizing on getting more units onto the field, or you're increasing your hand size simply to get Alchemy Magic quicker and more effective. And with the combos you can get, you can either Persona Ride, but when you Persona Ride and use Alchemy Magic, that's 20,000 power to the front row. So you're gaining a lot more power than you bargained for, and a lot of the time you're early game rushing your opponent with criticals and constant attacks. So, next grade 3 is another obvious one that most people would expect. It's 4 copies of Roaming Prison Dragon. Now, Roaming Prison, I've seen a fair few Zorga decks that don't actually run the 4 copies, or don't run any copies of Roaming Prison at all. I run the 4 simply because I like to have the discard fodder, and I like to have the guaranteed 1 or maybe 2 on the rear guard circle. And when you Alchemy Magic, it just brings itself back out with 10,000 power and a crit. Mixing that with the Persona Ride and the Alchemy Magic boost, you're hitting this on top of a, if you've got a Dragon Tree marker underneath, this is swinging for 30, maybe 40k at a time. Mixing that with boosting and more Dragon Tree markers, you can get between 50 and 60k when you're hitting with Roaming Prison. Sometimes on your first masque turn or first masque persona ride turn. So it makes for absolutely ridiculous numbers. And when you're going to be alchemagicking pretty much every turn in this deck, you're going to be getting this out near enough every turn with the extra 10,000 power and the extra critical on top. Last grade 3s, as you would expect, I'm running 2 copies of the Masque of Hydragram. I have debated in this deck knocking down a copy of Roaming Prison to run the 3, just simply for the Alchemagic cost, because more orders means more Alchemagic, which means a lot more shenanigans. However, I feel a lot more comfortable with the 2, simply because I can manually get this into drop zone without having to cast it. I can just search it into deck with cards like Shadow Cloak, which when on place you search for a card and just discard it. I can get it back into hand with cards like Zorga Masque himself, or I can use Shadow Cloak's skill to just capitalize on getting the Masque out there a lot more quicker. Especially in this deck where, going into the Masque, even when your opponent is on grade 2, it is a lot more viable tactic in this deck, simply because, yes, you miss out on the Persona Ride, but you still get the Persona Ride power because you're going to be using Alchemagic. So it's just, there's a lot of combos you can do with this deck. Getting the Masque into drop zone early, using it to Alchemagic. I've been in situations where I've actually used Alchemagic from the Masque with another Masque. So I'm checking the top 10 for maybe 2 copies of Zorga Masque, or 1 copy of Zorga Masque and a Dragon Tree Wretch, or two different Dragon Tree Wretches. 1 binds, of course, unfortunately, but then again, once you're on the Masque, you're happy, you're living life. So we're good. So grade 2s, we're running 4 copies of Shadow Cloak. I am going with the 4 copies of Shadow Cloak, the 4-to-5 ratio, because I find the 4-to-5 ratio is a lot better, simply because this deck has a lot of drop zone manipulation, and I can call a lot of units back from the drop zone when and if I need to, depending if I have the right combos. So Shadow Cloak's ability is when he's placed, you search your deck for an order card. It has to be a normal order, so I don't run any blitz orders in this deck, and you discard it. So that can be anything from the Masque of Hydragram to any of the orders we run in this deck, which I will get to at the end, because I got them separated. Shadow Cloak's secondary ability is when you play an order this turn, you may Soul Blast 1 card, and Shadow Cloak himself gains 5,000 power. And if you Alchemagic, you can do the same skill. However, when you Alchemagic, you can choose one of your rear guards and you can bounce it back to hand. So this also negates the need to run more copies of Dragon Tree Wretches, because you can bounce them and capitalize on getting their skills on more than one occasion. So the next grade 2, as I mentioned a moment ago, I am running the 4-to-1 ratio. So as I'm running the 4 copies of Shadow Cloak, I am running the 1 copy of Dragon Tree Wretch Depth Iwelith. Now I don't need to run more than 1. I don't need to run more than 1 simply because I can search the Masque with Shadow Cloak and get it straight into a drop zone if I need to use it for Alchemagic or get it back into my hand. I can get Dragon Tree markers with Depth Iwelith or the grade 1. Bit of Alis. So it's just a bit of a choice really, but usually if you're going to run the 4 copies of Shadow Cloak, you only need to be running the 1 copy of Depth of Welleth, because you've got 5 cards who can manually get to the Masque of Hydragram either into the drop zone for you to be able to Persona Ride, or straight into your hand with Depth of Welleth, simply because you can get it into your hand to cast it later on. So it's definitely a decent combo. I wouldn't recommend running 2 copies of Depth of Welleth and 3 copies of Shadow Cloak, because again, you don't need to. You run 4 copies of Shadow Cloak because you can bounce this back to hand. So say if you've got this and Zorga Masque on the field, you Alchemagic with Zorga Masque, you use Shadow Cloak's skill, give it 5,000 power, bounce Depth of Welleth back to your hand, and then say, because at that point you're already going to have a Roaming Prison on the field, you move the Roaming Prison to the front and it's got now 15k power, potentially 25 because you Persona Road. So there's a lot of combos you can do, a lot of weird and wacky fun with this deck, which just capitalizes off bouncing cards back to hand and bouncing cards back to drop zone, back from drop zone onto rear guard. And the amount of markers, I've been in situations where because of this card and this card alone, I've been able to get 5 markers on the field in a single turn. If you have the counter blast for it, of course. Which, well, we've got counterblast anyway, and counter charges. So the next grade 2, I'm running, well, the last grade 2, should I say, I'm running 2 copies of Keel Severing. Keel Severing is just there as a 5k grade 2, and simply because who doesn't like multi-attack? You know, when Zorga Masque attacks, if you've got a Dragon Tree marker on the field, if this guy's in drop zone, you counterblast 1, Superior Call, Keel Severing onto a Dragon Tree marker, and if you've Alchemagics and Persona Ride, it's going to be getting the same amount of power that Roaming Prison has, just minus the critical. But again, it's a 4th attack on the turn, and if you've got triggers that you can put somewhere and you put them on Keel Severing, it's a more powerful attack to be putting more pressure on your opponent. So, grade 1s. I only run 2 grade 1s in this deck. I run 2 copies of Dragon Tree Wretch Bist of Valus. Again, the simple one of counterblast and gain a Dragon Tree marker, but predominantly I use Bist of Valus for his secondary skill. Now, usually I only need to get 2 Dragon Tree markers on the field in this deck, and I'm happy as can be. So I predominantly use Bist of Valus for his secondary skill, which I've never actually had to use in a different Stoicheia deck, but for Zorga it helps a lot. So you counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1 if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, and you choose a normal order in your drop and bounce it back to hand. So anybody who knows anything, especially when you're running this deck in a deck like Stoicheia Griffagila or Zorga Masks, you're going to be bouncing orders left, right, and center from hand back into drop and then back into hand again. So you Alchemagic, and if you want to keep that order, say it's Gather Upon Me, you Wandering Souls, you play Gather Upon Me, you discard, you Alchemagic, then you use this axe skill, bounce you Wandering Souls back into hand, and you're just setting yourself up for next turn for another triple drive attack. So, the last grade 1 we run, 4 PGs. 4 PGs, that's it. Apart from orders, 4 PGs. Just PGs. Enough said, it's PGs. So on to triggers, and then we will cover orders next. So I'm running 1 copy of Alchemic Hedgehog and 3 basic boy heal triggers. I was going to test out running 1 of each copy of the effect heals. However, I feel this deck needs more 15k shields and it to be a bit more defensive, and 9 times out of 10, a lot of the decks you come across are going to be critical heavy and gaining crits, especially with decks like Bafsagara, now with the new support. You've got Baiko Mask, you've got Gravidia, so you've got decks that just gain a lot more triggers, and if you're playing a mirror match against Zorga, well, this is your best defense against a card like Roaming Prison, because Roaming Prison gains a critical. So it's just there to fill you know, the thing. So 7 crits, I believe, no, 8 crits this time. I just swap it over. So I run 4 basic boy crits, and then I run the effect crits. The effect crits are there simply because this deck requires a fair bit of soul. And early game, you want to be getting at least 1 or maybe 2 of these guys into the soul, and then you discard with the rest, because once you've got 2 of these guys in soul, you're hitting happy. You're getting effects for Shadow Cloak and different rear guards, and then you're also getting more soul for your orders, so you can Alchemagic a lot better. So they help a lot. Last but not least, for triggers, well, for main triggers, I run 3 draws. Fronts, potential in this deck, but I've tested it out with fronts and I don't like them personally. Draws, I feel, are better because the more cards you have in hand, the more orders you're going to be having in hand, and the more triggers you have in hand. So you're guarding, and then you've got more targets for Alchemagic, so you're just doing a lot better when it comes to having a bigger hand. And then bigger hand means more cards to call, more cards to discard, and more combos. Last but not least for triggers is the Stoicheia Overtrigger. Stoicheia Overtrigger, especially in Zorga Masks, is absolutely filthy, in my opinion. Especially with the simple effect that this, the Overtrigger does everything it says on the tin. It draws, it heals, it fronts, it crits. Especially in this deck, if you've got things like Zorga Mask and 2 Roaming Prisons on the rearguard, and you drive check this, you've practically won the game unless your opponent can PG every single attack coming at them. So, on to orders now. So orders are very, very simple. We're running 3 copies of Frozen Resentment. Now, these are proxies for now, but then again, I am getting them. They are currently on their way. So I am happy just to show them off as proxies until I get the real copies. So this is the first order we want to, realistically, the first order we want to play in the game. barring the Masque of Hydragram. Its cost is a Soul Blast 1, so depending on what you have in Soul, if you have an order like Tearful Malice, if you have Tearful Malice in Soul, or you have something else in Soul, and you're able to, so say if you have either the Masque of Hydragram or Tearful Malice in Soul, and you Soul Blast to play Frozen Resentment, you can Alchemagic with the order you just dropped, because the timing works, because you Soul Blast to play the Frozen Resentment, and then you bind the order you just Soul Blasted for Alchemagic. So you don't even have to use more cards from hand or drop zone, so it helps a lot. So you check the top 3 cards to discard a card, and then any card in your drop zone that is grade equal or less than your Vanguard, you just call it out. Or, you know, you can just mess around with combos. And then straight into drop zone, so that's, you know, it's a good first order to play, especially if you're going to be setting up for late game Alchemagic. The next order we play is 1 copy of Tearful Malice. Tearful Malice is your counter charger in the deck. Again, only need to run 1 copy of it because you're going to be bouncing it back and forth. And if you've got it in Soul, job done. You can Soul Blast it, Alchemagic it. But once you Alchemagic it, then it's going to be bound. And unfortunately, if you're not running cards like Bell, you can't get it back into drop zone, which unfortunately I can't find room for Bell in Zorga Masks. So I'm happy with it the way it is. My next grade 2 order is 2 copies of Gather Upon Me, Ye Wandering Souls. I know a lot of Zorga Masks decks and a lot of Zorga decks in general run potentially 3 to 4 of Ye Wandering Souls. You don't need to. 2 is absolutely perfect, again, because you can get it set up in the drop zone with Shadow Cloak. You can get it set up in the drop zone with various things. If you have it in your hand early game, then you just discard it for riding, or you can discard it when you ride into Rancor Chain and get it back into hand with Blacktear Husk. So there's a lot of different choices you can make, a lot of different combos you can do. It's nice to give your Vanguard triple drive, because who doesn't like having triple drive these days, unless you're a grade 4 or a stride, which, you know. And in Alchemagic, you play Ye Wandering Souls, discard a card, triple drive, next turn, Alchemagic, bind Ye Wandering Souls if you don't have it back in hand, another triple drive for the next turn. So that is just basically that, and it's just a really helpful card. The last card of the deck is the only grade 3 order we run, barring the Masque of Hydragram. It is, what is it? Clouded Miasma. I always forget what it's called.
Is that from the festival?
From Festival Collection, I believe it is, yes. It is Clouded Miasma.
I have not seen that card.
Clouded Miasma is a very good skill. Especially when you Alchemagic it, but even in the normal skill, it's fantastic anyway. You play it with a Counterblast 1, you choose a grade 3 or less card from your drop and call it. So literally any card from your drop zone and call it. And your Vanguard gains the ability, if I believe, if you have to Alchemagic to get the secondary skill, but 9 times out of 10 you're going to be using Alchemagic a fair bit in this deck regardless. But basically, if you play this with Alchemagic, your Vanguard gets this skill, your front row gets 5,000 power. So mixing that with Zorga Mask, with Alchemagic and Persona Ride, it's a 15k, 25k, mixed with with draw triggers and power, with triggers in general. It's just a lot of power to give to your units.
With
so,
Dragon Tree Markers.
Dragon Tree Markers, everything just stacks, and this deck can make silly numbers very, very quickly. So yeah, there we go. So, mixing with the orders, I only run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 normal orders, and then with the 2 Masque of Hydragrams, that's only 9. I know a lot of Zorga decks and a lot of Zorga Mask decks will tend to run anywhere between 10 to 12 orders, again, including the Masque of Hydragrams. But I find 9 is a perfect, comfortable number because you don't need to be wasting your hand and having too many things, especially when you have cards like normal Zorga, where you can just get a free Alchemagic on grade 1 before your Persona Ride. You can get cards into drop zone and out of drop zone with your Ride deck, cards like Shadow Cloak. You've got cards like the other orders, which can purposely put things in. Best Surveyors can bounce things back. You've got Depth of Wealth to get the mask in there. Shadow Cloak just forcefully puts orders into drop zone. So there's a lot of different combos you can do with this deck to capitalize and forcefully get your Alchemagic out a lot more quicker. So, but yes. So that was the deck profile, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. Zorga Mask is definitely a deck that I myself have come to really, really enjoy.
Masanori.
Well, yes, I mean, I don't like Masanori as a character, but I absolutely love Zorga as a deck. Considering I was the one person at Locals who absolutely despised this deck, I hated playing it, I hated playing against it, but now that Zorga Mask is out, the deck feels very, very different.
I only played against once. I was on grade 2, but my opponent went to grade 3, Alchemagic, 2 Roman Prison Dragons.
Yes, you can very quickly finish your opponent off if they're on grade 2. If you can get to the mask before your opponent, you're gaming. You're absolutely loving life. As my friend Victor likes to say, we're zogging hard. So there we go. Right then, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to like and subscribe, and we will have more deck profiles and some more videos coming up. I will reveal to you now that at least 2 or all of us are headed to BCS in Cardiff this year, so we will have some live streaming videos potentially going up, and we'll have some videos of the BCS in general coming up, and obviously game results and stuff like that. So look forward to that one, guys. But I will see you in the next video. Again, remember to like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you all very much later.